It had been a typical Monday morning at the offices of Smith & Company, a mid-sized tech firm that had been a staple in the industry for over 2 decades. The employees were sipping their coffee, checking their emails, and getting settled in for another busy day. But little did they know, their world was about to be turned upside down. As they gathered in the conference room for the usual morning meeting, a sense of unease filled the air. The new boss, Mr. Johnson, stood at the front of the room, a stern expression on his face. He had been brought in a few months ago to shake things up and increase profits, but so far, his methods had been met with skepticism by the employees. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice firm but laced with a hint of nervousness. "As you are all aware, the current economic climate is challenging. In order to stay competitive, we must make some difficult decisions. Unfortunately, this means that we will be undergoing a significant restructuring of our staff." The room fell silent as Mr. Johnson continued to speak, his words dripping with corporate jargon. But the employees knew what was coming. They had heard the rumors, seen the writing on the wall. And then, it happened. Mr. Johnson dropped the bombshell. Over a third of the staff, including many longtime employees, would be let go, effective immediately. I was one of them. As I packed up my belongings and said my goodbyes, I couldn't help but feel a sense of betrayal. I had given my all to this company, poured my heart and soul into my work. And this was how they repaid me. By throwing me out like yesterday's trash. But I wasn't alone. Many of my colleagues, people I had worked with for years, were also given the boot. We exchanged numbers, promised to stay in touch, and vowed to support each other through this difficult time. As the days turned into weeks, the remaining employees struggled to adjust to the new reality. Mr. Johnson had brought in a fresh batch of faces, cheaper and younger, to replace the experienced staff he had so callously discarded. But there was a problem. The new hires had no experience with the company's proprietary servers. The servers, which had been developed in-house over the years, were a unique and complex system. They had been tailored to the specific needs of the company, and only the employees who had been there for a while truly understood how they worked. The new hires, despite their enthusiasm and eagerness to learn, were stumped. One of the new employees, a young woman named Sarah, was assigned to take over my responsibilities. She had a background in IT, but had never worked with a system like ours before. As she sat at my old desk, staring at the unfamiliar interface, she looked like a deer in the headlights. "I don't understand why it's not working," she said, frustration etched on her face. "I've done everything the manual says, but it just won't cooperate." I watched from afar, feeling a mix of emotions. Part of me wanted to help her, to show her the ropes and get her up to speed. But another part of me was angry, resentful of the fact that I had been replaced by someone who didn't have the same level of experience. As the days turned into weeks, the new employees struggled to get the system working. They would make progress, only to be slowed down by some obscure quirk or bug that only the old-timers knew how to fix. The company's productivity plummeted, and Mr. Johnson's face grew increasingly red with rage. But the new employees weren't the only ones who were struggling. The remaining staff, who had been spared the axe, were also feeling the effects of the changes. They had to relearn the system, adapt to the new way of doing things, and deal with the disruption caused by the influx of new faces. It was like trying to learn a new language, one that was similar but not quite the same. The muscle memory that had been built up over years of working with the old system was still there, but it was now a hindrance rather than a help. The employees would find themselves performing tasks out of habit, only to realize that the new system didn't work that way. As the weeks turned into months, the company's performance continued to suffer. Mr. Johnson's cost-cutting measures had backfired, and the once thriving business was now on the brink of disaster. I, along with many of my former colleagues, had moved on to new opportunities. We had found new jobs, started new businesses, and were thriving in our new endeavors. But we couldn't help but look back on our time at Smith & Company with a sense of nostalgia and regret. We had been a family, a team that had worked together towards a common goal. But Mr. Johnson's actions had torn that family apart, leaving behind a trail of devastation and heartbreak. As I looked back on those tumultuous months, I realized that the true cost of Mr. Johnson's actions went far beyond the financial. He had destroyed a team, a community, and a way of life. And for what? To save a few bucks. To increase profits. In the end, it was a false economy. The company's reputation had been tarnished, its productivity had plummeted, and its employees had been left feeling betrayed and disillusioned. Mr. Johnson's experiment had failed, and the consequences would be felt for years to come. But as I sat at my new desk, in my new office, I couldn't help but feel a sense of hope. I had been given a second chance, a chance to start anew and build something better. And I knew that I wasn't alone. My former colleagues, scattered though we were all doing the same thing. We were rebuilding, restarting, and rediscovering ourselves. And as we looked to the future, we knew that we would emerge stronger, wiser, and more resilient than ever before. The experience had been painful, but it had also been a valuable lesson. As the old adage goes, you get what you pay for. And in the case of Smith & Company, the pursuit of cheap labor and cost-cutting measures had ultimately led to the company's downfall. But for those of us who had been affected, it had also led to a new beginning, a chance to start anew and build something better. And as I smiled to myself, feeling a sense of closure and newfound purpose, I knew that I would never forget the lessons I had learned at Smith & Company. The experience had been difficult, but it had also been transformative. And for that, I would be eternally grateful.